Immunize your children before the start of school. Call the Board of Health.
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. What will the U.S. government do next in dealing with that Soviet attack on a Korean airliner? Our main focus tonight, the options available to President Reagan in reacting to the airliner incident. And a chance for you to express your opinion on whether the United States should take strong action against the Soviet Union. Also tonight, the impact of the incident in Europe. How will the peace movement respond? We'll talk with one of that movement's leaders in Britain.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
We're going to be running another one of our telephone surveys tonight, and in just a couple of minutes, you'll have the opportunity to begin stating your opinion to the question, in your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets? The state of Ohio today wasn't waiting for the federal government to react to the Soviet attack on the Korean airliner. Ohio Governor Richard Celeste ordered the State Department of Liquor Control to stop handling Soviet-made vodka. And indeed, the state's 427 liquor outlets began today removing all Russian vodka from their shelves. Acting just as quickly, the National Conservative Political Action Committee, NCPAC, whipped out a television commercial that was nothing if not direct.
On August 31st, the Soviet Union shot down an unarmed civilian jetliner, murdering 269 innocent people, including Congressman Lawrence P. MacDonald. Yet some congressmen still want to appease the Soviet Union by supporting a nuclear freeze that would make the Soviets more powerful and allow them to kill more innocent people. To find out if your congressman is voting to appease the Soviet Union with a nuclear freeze, call 1-800-331-1000.
With us now live in our Washington bureau is the man behind the political message you just heard, Terry Dolan, Executive Director of NCPAC, the National Conservative Political Action Committee. And joining us via satellite from London, one of the leaders of the British peace movement, Monsignor Bruce Kent, Secretary General of Britain's Committee on Nuclear Disarmament. Monsignor Kent, let me begin by asking you whether you believe that what happened with that Soviet airliner the other day in any way reflects on the Soviet Union's peaceful or lack of peaceful intentions.
I think it's a barbaric act, and I think it represents the paranoia of superpowers when they feel themselves under great threat. And I think the connection between that and the freeze is really completely illogical. It's precisely because there are so many weapons in the world that we are in this state of fear one to the other. So I certainly condemn the act, but I don't take the conclusion at all that NCPAC does.
All right, Terry Dolan, why do you come to the conclusion that you do? Why do you relate the one event to the other?
Well, the Monsignor's comments are very reminiscent of Neville Chamberlain telling us that we could negotiate with monsters. What we are seeing today is, in fact, an evil empire that has demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that since it doesn't mind killing 20 or 40 million of its own people, it certainly doesn't mind killing 269 innocent civilians. And I hope that there are people who are finally reevaluating their positions, who supported appeasement ploys like the nuclear arms freeze, who are now saying, wait a second, we have to share some responsibility for encouraging the Soviets to do actions like this. And we ought to take swift, decisive actions to let the Soviets know they will never get away with this type of stunt again.
What Terry Dolan, what NCPAC is doing here in Washington, Monsignor, is, I suppose, a reflection of a certain level of frustration and anger that appears here in the United States in a rather widespread fashion. To what degree is that reflected in Europe and in the United Kingdom?
Well, outrage about the episode is certainly reflected here. There's no question about that. But I think when Mr. Dolan starts talking about an evil empire, I think then we go into a kind of Star Wars mentality, which is the kind of seed of the arms race. For us, you see, the superpowers are not to be seen as one black and the other white, or whatever the equivalent is. We see here what's happening in Salvador, we see what's happening in Guatemala, and we see American responsibility for tyrannies around the world. So I think talk of evil empires actually feeds the arms race.
All right, Terry Dolan, a quick final comment from you. We'll come back to both of you later in the broadcast.
Sure. I'm sick and tired of hearing people lecture us about the difference between right and wrong when they clearly do not know. Anyone who would suggest that the United States would ever consider shooting down an unarmed civilian plane is downright foolish and irresponsible.
All right. On that note, let me leave you for the moment. As I say, I'll be back with both of you later in the broadcast. Throughout this broadcast this evening, we'll be conducting a non-scientific telephone survey. That survey will allow you to express your opinion on U.S. response to the Soviet Union in the wake of the downing of that Korean jetliner. Specifically, the question is, in your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets? If your answer is yes, the number to call to register your opinion is 1-900-210-6000. If your answer is no, that strong action is not called for, the number to call is 1-900-210-7000. As with all 900 numbers, the telephone company will bill you 50 cents for the call. Our question again, in your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets? We'll be tallying your responses throughout the broadcast, and later tonight, in addition to our telephone survey, as kind of a means of checking it out, we'll have the results of a more scientific poll conducted today by ABC News on just what type of response the U.S. should make. Coming up next, a report on tonight's meeting at the White House where President Reagan met with the National Security Council on the Korean plane incident. We'll talk live with Richard Burt, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, about the U.S. response.
Say, these food bars are really tasty. I didn't know Amway makes food products.
Amway offers over 350 different nutrition, personal care, home care, and houseware products. They're more than just a soap company.
Well, how come you know so much about Amway?
I have my own Amway business.
You mean you're leaving me?
No, my husband and I are building financial independence as part-time Amway distributors.
5 minutes, Mr. Hope.
Is that opportunity knocking?
Discover today's Amway. Better than ever.
If you're running low on Glidden, you'll be happy to know that Kmart is now stocked up. To celebrate, we've put Glidden Spread Wall on sale at half price, just $4.94 a gallon.
Wait a minute, that's it?
Oh, that's Glidden Cloud Blue.
$4.94 a gallon.
What's this?
$4.94 a gallon.
This one, what is that? And
Glidden, half price at Kmart, not half bad.
what's this?
Mustard. I had a hot dog for lunch.
Kmart, we got it, and we got it good.
I miss you, Mama. I miss the city, too.
What if we sent you a little bit of your hometown?
Now, how you gonna do that? White Castle hamburgers from back home. You can't get them out here. My folks sent them.
Hey, time to get White Castle! White Castle!
You know, on my first date, we stopped at a White Castle.
White Castle has the taste some people won't live without.
Can you tell where I am? Jewelry, fine gift shop with good personal service, a first-class department store? It's W. Bell. You can tell by the low prices. Bell has the Commodore 64 on sale. That's the 64K RAM Commodore Color computer, the most advanced in its class. Only $199.90. Commodore makes a heck of a gift. The first place for value is Bell.
W. Bell.
News is really a mirror held up to society. It shows us who we are, how we are, and what we're doing.
We bring you face to face with the world. ABC's World News Tonight, weeknights with Peter Jennings.
President Reagan, in his first personal statement on the Korean airliner incident, said today, before leaving California for Washington, that the Soviets are flagrantly lying about the downing of the plane. The Soviet news agency TASS issued a new Soviet statement on the incident a short time later. TASS said that Soviet fighters had fired warning tracer shots along the flying route of the aircraft. That was the first Soviet acknowledgement that shots had been fired, but the Russians did not admit shooting down the airliner and insinuated that the aircraft was in fact on a spy mission for the CIA. Secretary of State Shultz responded to that statement by saying, "The world is waiting for the Soviet Union to tell the truth." When President Reagan got back to Washington late this afternoon, the aircraft incident and what to do about it was the only issue on his agenda. White House correspondent Sam Donaldson reports.
The president returned to Washington so that he could more directly take charge of organizing a response to the Soviet attack and be seen to be doing it, having reconsidered his first idea that he organized things from his ranch in California. Almost immediately, key advisors, cabinet officers, and staff specialists gathered at the White House for an expanded meeting of the National Security Council. It was expected to last for an hour, but lasted for nearly 2 hours. Afterward, Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speaks said the president had considered a range of options that focus on a measured response by the United States, together with other nations. A response, Speaks said, designed to assure that there will be no reoccurrence of this incredible incident. Speaks wouldn't discuss the options, but administration officials have all but ruled out some actions that some people have publicly urged. For instance, diplomatic relations with Moscow will not be broken. Economic sanctions will not be imposed. In other words, no grain embargoes, no trade embargoes of any kind. Arms negotiations at Geneva will not be broken off. In fact, talks on reducing theater nuclear weapons will resume in a week. And Secretary of State Schultz will meet Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko later this month to discuss the air attack as well as previously scheduled topics. So what does that leave? Perhaps international sanctions on air travel by the Soviets. For one thing, Federal Aviation Administrator Helms attended tonight's White House meeting. It is said the president gave directions to his staff for refining the most likely options, and they're going to report back to him before he briefs congressional leaders at 10 o'clock Sunday morning here at the White House and before final consultations with U.S. allies on which directions to go.
Sam, one gets the impression that the direction this administration is going in is just to make the most of what is, in a sense, an international public relations bonanza. Would you... Oh, well, let me just have your view on that.
Well, Ted, I think you've hit the nail on the head to some extent, but there's quite a dilemma here. Your question tonight, I think, points it up. Do we want strong action or weak action, you're asking our viewers? Well, from the president on down, everyone wants strong action. No one wants weak action. But what is strong action? Well, not going to war. Would the grain farmers say strong action is another grain embargo? Maybe not. Would the Caterpillar employees say strong action is an embargo on highly technical, mechanized equipment to the Soviet Union? Maybe not. I mean, you go down the list of action, and it may be too strong for some people.
Sam, are we actually going to get an announcement, a decision, or will it be one of these things where they're saying in effect to us, you'll know it when you see it?
Well, Ted, I think we'll get a decision announced sometime next week. But first, there's the process of consulting congressional leaders and then consulting U.S. allies. Until then, we'll get leaks, but probably nothing official.
All right, let's see how much of a leak we can get tonight, Sam Donaldson. Thanks very much, because with us live now in our Washington bureau is Richard Burt, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, who's been dealing directly with Soviet diplomats in Washington in connection with the Korean airliner incident. Secretary Burt, let me hit you first of all with something that came out of Japanese news sources, and they were quoting sources from their own Defense Department suggesting that an American aircraft carrier was headed for Sakhalin Island to help in, as it was put, to help in the recovery effort. Anything to that?
Well, Ted, I can deny that report. We are not sending military forces into the area. We do have an air-sea rescue and reconnaissance operation underway in the area, as do the Japanese, as do the Soviets. But we are not escalating or alerting our forces in the region.
Is there any cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union in terms of this air-sea rescue? Are they asking for our help? Are we offering for help? I mean, are we offering our help? Any coordination at all?
Well, we have more than offered our help. We have gone to the Soviets and asked that we be allowed to participate in the rescue operation. We are, of course, participating in a reconnaissance operation in the Sea of Japan, but we would like, if possible, to participate in waters closer to Soviet territory. So far, they have refused to permit us to do this.
Bring us up to date, because there have been subtle changes, in a sense, not quite hour by hour, but certainly since the first Soviet non-response. What are the Soviets saying right now as to the incident? What is the last you've heard?
Well, the last we have heard is really the last you have heard, and that is that they have continued to evade responsibility, the very clear responsibility, for shooting down this aircraft and killing 269 innocent civilians. And they are claiming in a preposterous statement that this is somehow related to an American espionage mission, which is, as I say, preposterous, that the United States of America would use a Korean airliner, a 747, with innocent women and children aboard to carry out a spying mission.
All right, well, let me ask you why is it preposterous? I guess we all know the answer, but it would be helpful to have you say it.
Well, I think it's very clear that we would never, under any circumstance, put such innocent people's lives in jeopardy to carry out any kind of intelligence operation.
Let me be more cynical for a moment. Why wouldn't you? Let's assume for a moment that you would be just that rough and tough and nasty about it. Do you need that kind of intelligence, I guess is the question I'm asking.
Well,
can't you get it from U-2s? Can't you get it from satellites?
I think people know that we have satellites and other means of collecting intelligence. But obviously sending an aircraft for 2.5 hours being tracked by the Soviet Union directly over Soviet airspace is not a very clever intelligence ploy. The Soviets tracked that aircraft continuously. They sent fighter planes against it, and they attacked it in a belligerent act.
All right, some of your colleagues, anonymously quoted in tomorrow morning's Washington Post, for all I know you may be one of those quoted, are suggesting...
I can tell you that I'm not.
All right, are suggesting that U.S. intelligence has concluded from checking Japanese transcripts of the air-to-ground communications that maybe the pilot who shot the plane down really didn't know that it was a commercial airliner.
I think that is a difficult thing to believe, Ted, when you recognize, again, that the Soviets tracked the aircraft for 2.5 hours, that we know that the pilot of the aircraft had visual contact with the aircraft when he fired his missile. It's very difficult to believe that a 747, a very large and unique aircraft, is somehow going to be confused as a military or espionage aircraft. It's very, very implausible, to say the least.
Even though it's being viewed from a mile away at night, or a couple of miles away at night?
Well, we know that that aircraft spent a good deal of time with the 747. It flew around the aircraft, and it, again, is very implausible. But I would have to say that if even the Soviet Union believed that it was a military aircraft, the fact that it took action of the sort that it did, that it shot it down, raises another set of very troubling questions that we have to ask ourselves. I think we have to remember that these kinds of incidents occur all the time, all over the world. We have Soviet military aircraft as well as civilian aircraft intrude into American airspace. This has happened a countless number of times. And of course, the United States has never downed a Soviet aircraft under these circumstances.
Let me, before, and in a moment we're going to take the first look at the telephone poll results, but before we go to those, I would like to come back to what the White House said tonight, namely that there is going to be a measured response. Measured response does not mean strong. Why not?
Well, I don't think that. I think you're now quibbling with words.
Well, that's your business at the State Department,
I think we recognize that a strong, firm, sustained response is necessary. And the President of the United States was able tonight in a lengthy session of the National Security Council to hear a number of recommendations. He is now looking at those recommendations. He will be consulting this weekend with the congressional leadership. We at the State Department are consulting closely with our NATO allies. We're talking to our Asian friends and allies. I think it's important in thinking about this problem to recognize that, yes, there is an important U.S.-Soviet component. An American congressman was killed. A number of other Americans were killed. But this isn't just a U.S.-Soviet problem. It's an international problem. The Soviet Union, in a sense, has told the United States, as well as every other country in the world, that it doesn't care about world opinion. And we have to, I think, in approaching this problem, do our best to organize, support, and sustain an international response.
All right, Secretary Byrd, if you'd be good enough to stand by, we'll come back to you a little bit later in this broadcast. First of all, let's take a look at the initial results in our telephone poll, and we'll have them up on the screen for you in just a moment. Sooner than that, I hope. Well, I'm not seeing them, but I am told that it is an overwhelming response, initially at least, overwhelmingly in favor of strong action. Here now, once again, are the telephone numbers that you can call if you want to become involved in this poll. And let me restate the question. In your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets? Those who believe the answer to that question should be yes, call the number 1-900-210-6000. Those who believe the answer should be no, call the number 1-900-210-7000. In a moment, we'll talk with South Korea's representative at the United Nations, where the Security Council met in urgent session today to discuss the downing of Korean Flight 7. And we'll talk again about reaction and response to the incident with our guests from the State Department, NICPAC, and the Committee on Nuclear Disarmament.
She came right out and told me my teeth were yellow from smoking.
I didn't want to embarrass him, but he did get the topol.
When smoke from one cigarette can leave a stain like this, imagine what a pack a day can do to your teeth. Topol is formulated to help remove ugly yellow tobacco stains, yet Topol cleans gently enough to be used every day.
Topol is kind of expensive compared to regular toothpaste.
Oh, but compared to what cigarettes cost.
Your teeth are so much brighter now.
Yeah.
Topol, smoker's tooth polish.
Aren't clam bakes fun, Morris?
Not if you're a clam.
Look what I'm having.
I never eat anything that walks sideways.
Here's something special for you.
Anchors away, Morris.
Don't be finicky. It's 9 Lives seafood platter.
Sea air does improve my appetite.
9 Lives nutritious seafood platter has fish, even real shrimp and crabs.
Seafood platter ahoy.
9 Lives, the unique recipes cats can't resist.
9 Lives, you're oceans apart from the rest.
If you have a little trouble getting started in the morning...
Donald, are you up?
What you need is a little animal behavior.
Time for Larry Lujak's Animal Stories.
Uncle Lair gets more people going than anyone else. So if he can't get you started, nothing can.
Larry Lujak, Super Jock.
On WLS AM 89 and FM 95.
Right now, Solozzi Edelson Chevrolet is having their once-a-year cleanup sale.
We've reduced prices so low on every 83 Chevy car and truck in stock that we guarantee you can't beat our deal, or we'll give you back the difference in cash.
We even guarantee that if you can't find the exact color Chevette or Citation from our large selection, we'll sell you an 84 for the same price.
The place? Solozzi Edelson Chevrolet in Elmhurst at York and Roosevelt Roads.
I'm David Hartman. Next week, how will a Soviet attack on that Korean airliner affect U.S.-Soviet relations? Also, all week, unemployment and the future job outlook on Good Morning America.
NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle joins me on ABC Sports Beat Saturday.
The United Nations Security Council met in urgent session today to consider the downing of that Korean airliner by a Soviet fighter plane. As the council met, some 1,500 Korean Americans staged an emotional anti-Soviet demonstration near the UN headquarters building in New York. The crowd burned a Soviet flag while chanting anti-Russian and anti-communist slogans. At one point, police had to hold back the demonstrators as they surged toward the UN building. At the meeting inside, South Korean Ambassador Kyung-won Kim demanded full compensation from the Soviet Union for all 269 people who were apparently killed when the Korean jetliner was shot down. Ambassador Kim is with us now, live in our New York studios. Ambassador Kim, let me ask you a very practical question, if I may, sir. What do you think the chances are of receiving satisfaction from the Soviet Union?
Obviously, I cannot say we are terribly optimistic, but we believe that the Soviets must do something other than evade the question as they have been doing. The central question which they have been evading is whether they have really whether they are prepared to admit that they have shot down the airplane. And I believe that they should admit that.
The question, Ambassador Kim, that we are discussing here tonight, that is being discussed, I guess, in every dining room, bar, and restaurant in the country at some point or another today, is what can be done? What can the United States do? What can a country like South Korea do?
As for what the United States can do and must do, I must tell you, Ted, that I am hardly in a position to speak publicly about what I believe the United States should do. As for my own country, frankly, our options are rather limited because we don't have any diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. That is why we brought the issue to the United Nations Security Council. And I hope the Security Council, after deliberations, will be able to do something at least to make sure that the Soviet Union is less likely in the future to repeat the same kind of violent action.
Mr. Ambassador, as you know, a great many unanswered questions still around this tragedy. One of the most serious, I suppose, because it is from the answer to this question that all else, I suppose, follows. How is it possible that the pilot could have been so far off course?
We ourselves have no evidence, firm, absolute evidence indicating that our airplane was that far off the course. But the important point that I want to tell you, Ted, is that we need all the evidence we can have to pinpoint exactly where the airplane was when it was shot at by the Soviet missile. And to do that, we believe that we need access to the crash site and the area around there to be able to collect all the evidence that we may be able to, even at this point.
Forgive me, Ambassador Kim, you know that's not going to happen, don't you? I mean, there's no way that the Soviets are going to give you access to that crash site. So what's the answer to that?
Well, we are going to make we have made the demand, and we will see what the Soviets will have to say about that.
I must say I'm a little surprised to hear you express doubt that the plane was off course. Even your friends and allies here in the United States don't seem to have any doubt that the plane was indeed at least 100 miles and maybe more than 100 miles off course.
I said we don't have any concrete evidence ourselves that indicates that the airplane was that far off the course. But as I said, we are not saying the airplane was exactly at a point X when it was shot at by the Soviet Union and by Soviet missile.
Do you have any way of knowing? Now, I realize we're dealing here with the... Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
you wanted to make another point?
I want to point out to you that this is a really irrelevant issue as far as we are concerned, because international law does not provide any excuse for shooting down an unarmed civilian airplane under any circumstances. Even if you assume that the Korean airline jet was off course, and even if it strayed into the Soviet airspace, that does not give the Soviets any justification for shooting down that airplane. The Chicago Convention on Civil Aviation specifically prohibits any state from resorting to the use of force against a civilian airline which may have intruded into the airspace of a country.
All right, Ambassador Kim, a little bit later in the broadcast, I want to talk to you again as we talk to all of our other guests, but I want to ask you one more question. Forgive me for asking it, but you know the Soviets are charging this, namely that the plane was involved in espionage activities. Now, Secretary Burt has already denied that, but since you are an official representative of the Korean government, I'd like to hear your response.
I agree absolutely with Secretary Burt that it's preposterous. The charge is preposterous. It's not only preposterous and false, but it is really, I believe it's really terrible that the Soviet Union is saying things like this instead of dealing with the central issue. The central issue is whether the Soviet Union is prepared to admit its responsibility for the shooting down of the Korean airline.
Ambassador Kim, thank you. As I say, we'll be back to you a little bit later in the broadcast. Now we'd like to take another look at our telephone poll, which is well underway. And as you can see, the results are enormously lopsided in favor of those who believe that, yes, the administration should take strong action against the Soviets. I would like to repeat that a little bit later in this broadcast we'll give you the results of a more scientific poll that we have taken during the course of the evening as kind of a check against this poll, which we emphasize again is not scientific. If you want to participate in this poll, we want to give you the numbers. Here once again, in response to the question, in your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets? If you want to say yes, then dial the number 1-900-210-6000. If you want to register a vote of no, dial the number 1-900-210-7000. And next, when we return to our discussion, we'll be joined by Les Gelb, national security correspondent for the New York Times.
It's coming. A new company offering computer-like telephones for your home, the latest information systems for business, and reliable long distance that lets you reach out and touch anyone, anywhere, anytime. A company committed to the world's best service and a promise for tomorrow that only the genius of Bell Laboratories can deliver. It's the same company that brought you the telephone. AT&T. More than a new look, a new outlook.
A diamond, a miracle. Every diamond is rare, but But a diamond of a carat or more is only 1 in a million. And like love, becomes more precious with time. The diamond solitaire, born from the earth, reborn on a woman. An extraordinary diamond of a carat or more. Show the world you couldn't have made it without her.
My family and I want to thank you for making Fleetwood Construction one of Chicagoland's busiest remodelers. And with interest rates down, we're offering you even more savings. Like porches from $13.82 per month, replacement windows from $20.73 per month, or rec rooms from $31.10 per month. And with our bank financing, there's no money down, no payments for 60 days, and lower monthly payments than ever before. For free estimates, call Fleetwood now, 588-3232.
You're invited to a going-away party at your Chicagoland Chevy dealers. It's the end of the model year, and we're giving these 83 Chevrolets a clearance price send-off. Celebrities at year-end prices worth celebrating. Citations at year-end savings that ring the bell. Full-size pickup deals that rate a cheer. You're invited, but hurry. Don't miss the going-away party at your Chicagoland Chevy dealers. The guys with the blue bow ties.
Joining all of our other guests now, live in our Washington bureau, is Leslie Gelb, national security correspondent for the New York Times and formerly a director of the Bureau of Military Political Affairs at the State Department. Les, I've got to ask you, you've seen those results come in. They are more than 10-to-1 in favor of strong action by the administration. Why do you think this tremendous feeling of frustration and anger and a call for strong action over an incident like this, terrible as it is, which seems to be an even stronger reaction than when 100,000 Soviet troops moved into Afghanistan, which seems to be an even stronger reaction than when the Soviets were threatening to move into Poland? It seems a little out of proportion, doesn't it?
It is, except when you think of it as the Frankenstein monster walking off the screen into your bedroom. All of a sudden, people have a sense of personal vulnerability. You know, international relations is abstract, remote, unreal. War is being fought in strange places like Afghanistan, and you can explain it away in part as power politics. Here is something that could happen to you or me. It has a very tangible, very human quality.
All right, let me ask you then, because obviously Rick Burt, and when you were in government, you wouldn't have been able to respond either. What can a president do at a time like this? When we talk about strong response, or if you want to use the term that the White House used today, a measured response, what can be done?
President's options are always more limited than people on the outside will allow. You know, if Jimmy Carter or Henry Kissinger was proposing to take a measured response, conservatives like Terry Dolan and maybe even my friend here, Rick Burt, would be flaying them alive for weakness. The fact is, when you look at the specific things the president can do, like grain embargo or cutting off the sale of oil and gas equipment or taking American diplomats out of the Soviet Union, when you look at any one of those, they end up hurting us as much as they hurt the Soviet Union.
All right, gentlemen, and I want to start moving around the world again now, and perhaps I'll begin with you, Monsignor Kent, in London. What do you think the effect is going to be? As you know, before the end of this year, the United States is scheduled to begin deploying its Pershing missiles and its cruise missiles in Europe. Is this kind of an event, which certainly makes the Soviets look tougher, meaner, perhaps nastier than some people might have thought a couple of months ago, is this kind of an event going to have any effect in that arena?
Well, I very much hope not, because however nasty you think the Soviets are, I see absolutely no point in introducing new missiles into the European theater which put the Soviets more on edge, which give them less time to react, which makes the war spirit even higher than it is at the moment. And I believe the critical thing about this episode is that great military powers behave sometimes quite irrationally when they think themselves under threat, or they might do. And to increase that level of threat in Europe, I think, is very damaging. So I very much hope that the White House's word measured is what will be done, and that it will not result in more missiles in Europe, which will increase the likelihood, I believe, ultimately of a catastrophe that nobody wants.
Secretary Byrd, quite obviously you do not agree that putting those Pershing missiles and those cruise missiles in Europe will create more of a problem, but do you believe that what has happened now in the past couple of days may make it more difficult for those who oppose the placement of those missiles in Europe to get their point across in Europe?
Well, Ted, I hope that it has some impact, because what I think this episode has demonstrated, in great contrast to what Monsignor Kent has said, is that you can't lump the two superpowers together. The Soviet Union and the United States are very different countries. It is inconceivable that the United States or any other Western country, including Bruce Kent's country, Britain, would have engaged in such an activity. And President Reagan and the other Allied leaders are not bent on deploying those missiles in Europe at the end of the year. Our whole policy is that we want a negotiated outcome that will make that deployment unnecessary. But we recognize that the Soviet Union will only negotiate seriously when it understands that without an effective equal agreement that we will deploy those missiles.
I guess what I'm asking you is, do you consider this, and I don't want to put it in such cold-blooded terms, but is this something of a public relations bonanza in that respect?
I don't like that term.
It's a horrible term, but you know what I mean by it.
I think most of the people in the Reagan administration, certainly the President and the Secretary of State, were not surprised by this episode. It's consistent with our view of the Soviet Union. But we think that perhaps others, perhaps in Europe, other Americans, other people in the world, that this might, in fact, teach them a little bit more about the nature of our adversary. It is an adversary that uses military force, that relies on the use of military force to intimidate its neighbors.
Terry Dolan, you clearly think that's a lesson that some Americans have yet to learn.
I think it is, and as a matter of fact, I'm beginning to wonder whether this administration understands it as well. If, in fact, what the Secretary said is true, all of us will be waiting for this administration to end these meaningless SALT discussions. Start discussions. It is painfully obvious that any regime that would shoot down and murder 269 people is not going to honor any agreement that it signs. As Lenin said back in 21, the whole purpose behind the Soviet Revolution was to lie, and it was always justified in the name of the revolution. Secondarily, obviously, we should be embargoing any trade technology. I think it's shocking, and I would guess that most Americans do not realize that those MiGs, the radars, the computers that operate those missiles that are aimed at American cities were provided via the technology developed here in the United States of America, and this administration ought to stop immediately paying for the Soviet military machine, paying for those MiG that shot down and killed a United States congressman and 268 other innocent people. So
Terry, you're expressing an opinion that, of course, you've expressed many times before. I suppose what I'm asking is what has really changed? I mean, why is the shooting down of that aircraft, heinous as it may be, why does that change, or why ought it to change the relationship of one superpower to another?
Well, it really shouldn't. I think Lascelles hit it right on the head. It made obvious what many of us already knew, and it was this is the first time that an American congressman has been killed by the Soviet Union, and I think people started to suddenly pay attention. And I hope they don't lose attention. I hope they will reflect to this administration and to the Congress that they are outraged and they want swift, decisive action.
Ambassador Kim, I know you represent officially only the Korean government, but I would like you also for a moment to represent Asia. What do you think Asian countries would like to see in terms of a U.S. reaction? I know you can't make recommendations to the United States, but what do you think Asians want to see?
Let me put it this way. What the Asian countries want to see, and not only the Asian countries, but every other country in the world should want to see, is some guarantee that civilian airplanes, whether they belong to the Republic of Korea, my own country, or whether they belong to a superpower or to middle power or small power, developing country, African country, will be able to fly around the world safely. As I said before, There is nothing in international law, in the practice of international civil aviation, that justifies the use of force against an unarmed civilian airplane, no matter what the airplane may have done. This is exactly the point that we wish to make. And incidentally, I am sure that there was no possibility that the Soviets could have made a mistake in identifying this plane as anything other than as a civilian airplane.
Why are you so sure?
Because this was a jumbo jet, 747, and we talk, in my talks with people involved in the flying business, they all tell me, and our impression is that it is impossible even in the nighttime to fail to identify the plane. And also, this was part of a regularly scheduled flight. 5 times a week, Korean Airlines flies a jet from JFK International Airport in New York to Korea. It flies over the same route. The route is predetermined, prearranged. Everybody knows this. The Soviets know this. Korean Airlines jumbo jet goes over that flight every week at the same hour, 5 times a week. Therefore, there was no possibility, in my view, that the Soviets could have made a mistake.
All right, gentlemen, let's take a break. Before we do, we want to take another look at how the telephone poll is going along. Let's look at the numbers right now. There they are. As you can see, more and more, overwhelmingly, the response is in favor of the administration taking strong action. Once again, if you want to participate in this poll, here's how you do it. It'll cost you 50 cents. The phone company will bill you. If you want to say that the administration should take strong action against the Soviets, in other words, if you are voting yes, dial the number 1-900-210-6000. If you want to vote no, that it should not take strong action, dial 1-900-210-7000. Now, I would like to thank all of our guests for joining us all around the world. In a moment, we'll have a report from West Germany on how the Korean plane incident may have affected U.S. policy there.
Over 1 million years ago, a single spark changed the world. There was fire, and the art of cooking was created. As that spark changed the past, whirlpool ranges and microwave ovens can change your future. Each one has been specially designed to give you the 2 things you look for most in a new range or microwave oven. Better meals, easy cleanups. And each range is backed by the same promise as our washers and refrigerators. The Whirlpool promise of good, honest quality that can make your world a little easier.
Separates that fit are on sale this week at Sears. Save $6 to $15 on these mix and match separates. Choose pants that fit for only $9.99. Save $15 on the blazer, only $24.99. Separates that fit different shapes and sizes in your choice of colors. Save $6 on both the skirt and blouse. So choose your separates, choose your size, and get together your separates that fit at these great savings through Saturday at Sears.
Ma'am, what's that cereal you're enjoying?
Well, it has delicious apple slices and cinnamon, and they call it fruit and, I forget.
Post Fruit and Fiber cereal. It tastes so good, you forget the fiber.
The name? With all these apples, it's got to be apple something. Or fruit something.
Fruit and Fiber tastes so good, you forget the fiber.
Sure, it's fruit and...
Billy, what is it? Fruit and Fiber, also with dates, raisins, and walnuts. It tastes so good, you forget the fiber.
If you've been seeing a lot more of the new Mercury Cougar on the road, there's a very good reason for it. People are buying them. The fact is, sales are already up more than 300% in the past 4 months.
Nice car.
Cougar from Mercury. Success does have a way of breeding success.
When you buy paint for your home, don't forget to pick up the painting accessories you'll need from True Value hardware stores. Seal cracks with GE silicone window and door sealant, and fasten building materials with Mako liquid nails. Then prepare surfaces for painting with quality Red Devil tools. Handle small painting jobs with True Test Orel polyester brushes. And for big jobs, rely on the Wagner 7-piece power painter from participating True Value hardware stores and home centers.
Over Over the past year in particular, the Soviet Union has been making some inroads in convincing West Europeans of its peaceful intentions. In that sense, the shooting down of the Korean airliner may prove to be not only a public relations disaster for the Soviets, but an unexpected boost for U.S. plans to base new missiles in Europe. Jim Hickey gives us a sense of the mood today in West Germany.
West Germans tonight were shown on television how NATO jet fighters would intercept unidentified aircraft.
Edmund scrambled 2 Phantoms for identification of unknown aircraft in Juliet Kilo 2050.
The point being made in this simulation is that an attack, such as the one on the South Korean 747, could not happen in any NATO country. This was part of a special West German broadcast, which was highly critical of the Soviet Union. During the program, a Bonn government spokesman said the shooting of the jumbo jet could only be regarded with complete disgust. Reaction in West German newspapers today was also harsh. This afternoon daily called the attack unbelievable, insanity by the Soviet military. The respected and conservative Die Welt, in a front-page editorial, described the incident as a cold-blooded crime. There was also tough talk from the U.S. Army here in Germany. At opening ceremonies today for Autumn Forge, the annual series of war games among NATO countries, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, General Bernard Rogers, questioned the effectiveness of the Soviet military command structure.
There is no question it was a wanton and ruthless, unprovoked destruction of human life. So it raises a question in our minds of what kind of control do they have over their forces.
Control of highly destructive weapons and the people who fire them were also questions in the minds of the West German peace movement, which this week began its autumn anti-missile campaign, protesting the planned deployment of American Pershing II and cruise nuclear missiles here. Police detained about 100 people today when they refused to clear their blockade of the U.S. airbase at Bitburg near the Luxembourg border. Although their protest is aimed at Russian as well as U.S. weapons and war-making capabilities, they seemed unwilling to believe the Soviets would intentionally shoot down an unarmed civilian aircraft.
I believe that it was a mistake of one man, of the pilot. I don't believe that it was an order by
Russian government.
By the Russian government.
It wasn't planned and it wasn't ordered. It was just a mistake. And this shows me if once again such a mistake happens, it may increase. And so we must fight more against these weapons.
Organizers of a second blockade at Mutlangen Army Airfield near Stuttgart also believe the Soviet attack was some sort of horrible human or technical error, and warned such a mistake could also occur with nuclear weapons, with much wider-ranging consequences. For Nightline, this is Jim Hickey in Frankfurt, West Germany.
As you know, during the past 45 minutes, we've been conducting our own unscientific phone survey. Let's take another look now at the results as they have been coming in. And as you can see, the results are overwhelmingly in favor at a rate of almost 20 to 1 now, in favor of the administration taking strong action against the Soviet Union. The question, of course, of what constitutes strong action, not clear, and no way of making it clear in this survey. As we've mentioned, in addition to our informal telephone survey, however, ABC News today conducted a more scientific poll about the kinds of responses to be considered by the U.S. government. And when we return, we'll have the results of that poll.
My partner and I were investigating the lettuce shortage and a new dressing from 7 Seas.
Whew, that was close.
I see it. New 7 Seas creamy Parmesan dressing.
Creamy Parmesan?
With real Parmesan cheese. Imagine the taste. Authentic Parmesan cheese in a creamy, smooth dressing.
New 7 Seas creamy Parmesan. We're caught. Say something.
With new 7 Seas creamy Parmesan,
our lettuce shortage may never end.
Right now, when you buy certain Teed Attic insulation, you'll get more than high-quality, energy-saving fiberglass. You'll also get a $1 rebate. In fact, you'll get $1 back for each of the first 40 rolls of certain Teed R19 you buy. Of course, an offer this good can't last forever, so look for the Certainteed Buck-a-Bundle rebate display at participating dealers now. You'll save money, saving energy.
Fran, I'll be with Dr. Sims.
Wait a minute.
What's wrong?
You need the breath deodorant.
You're kidding. I did have onion soup.
Here, Clarette's will take care of it.
Clarette's?
Clarette's is the breath deodorant. It'll freshen your breath fast.
Only Clarette's has Actisol with chlorophyll and helps your mouth's own freshening power eliminate bad breath.
The breath deodorant does cost a bit more, but it's worth it.
Thanks.
Anytime.
For fresh breath fast Clarette's, the breath deodorant.
Folks, I'm Mal Belaires, and I want to tell you about an entirely new way to buy brand name carpeting direct from a mill outlet warehouse, right in the comfort of your own home, for as little as $5.95 a square yard. That includes padding and professional installation. You can also buy Armstrong no-wax floor covering for as little as $3.95 a square yard. And yes, Carpetman offers excellent credit terms, too. So pick up the phone and dial Carpets, C-A-R-P-E-T-S. You may never pay retail again.
There's a heat wave that just won't quit, and Northern Illinois needs more power, fast. This is Collins, the one generating station in the Edison system, there to back up all the rest. It's designed to fire up fast. One miserable August, we got the call and went from 0 to 2.5 billion watts in just 5 hours. Next time it's 100 in the shade, and you crank up the air conditioner. Remember who's at the other end of the line, doing things right.
During our broadcast tonight, we've been conducting an informal telephone survey on the question, in your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets? Along with that informal and unscientific survey, ABC News conducted a more scientific poll earlier this evening on the airliner incident. Here now is correspondent Jack Smith with the results of that scientific poll.
This was a random scientific poll, Ted. People were asked what they thought on a number of key questions. The vast majority said the Soviets were wrong, and the vast majority thought the U.S. should take strong action. Asked if the Soviets knew they were shooting at an unarmed passenger jet, 96% of those who expressed an opinion said yes, the Soviets knew, and only 4% said the Soviets didn't know. An overwhelming 89% said the Soviets were not justified in shooting the Korean airliner down in Soviet airspace. Only a tiny 3% thought it was justified. The rest didn't know. Most Americans polled tonight said they believed the decision to shoot down the passenger jet was made high up by Soviet leaders, and most therefore thought President Reagan should punish the Soviets. To the question being asked in tonight's Nightline telephone survey, should the administration take strong action, 17% said no, 83% said yes. And to the question, will the administration take strong action against the Soviets? Of those with an opinion, 40% said yes, they thought it would, but 60% thought it would not. On the one best action the U.S. can now take in response to the Soviet attack, there were many answers.
The best action, I guess, would be to cut off diplomatic relationships with them.
But only 4% in tonight's poll agreed.
It's actually hard for me to say, but maybe war.
Only 2% agreed with this view, and most people were not sure what to do.
I don't know.
44% of those polled said they didn't know either, but a majority did think the Reagan administration should wait for a full explanation from the Soviets before taking action. All in all, then, most people polled tonight across the U.S. knew about the tragedy, blamed the Russians, and thought the president should punish them, but didn't know how. Ted?
Thank you, Jack. In a moment, we'll take a closing look at the numbers in our Nightline telephone poll, and I'll discuss the results with Les Gill.
Vitamins, and there are multivitamins. Vitamins that are flaky, bumpy, crispy, crunchy, and taste oh so good. It's new Kellogg's Product 19. More vitamin nutrition than any other cereal, but you'd never know by tasting, because Product 19 goodness comes from corn, oats, wheat, and rice. Delicious. New Kellogg's Product 19 cereal. Flaky, bumpy, crispy, crunchy. Vitamin.
When a woman wears black, she expects something to happen. When a woman wears Gloria Vanderbilt's black denim jeans, it usually does. They've got the fit the jeans are famous for, the tailoring, the details, and more. Gloria
Gloria Vanderbilt's black denims have all the mystery and magic of black. Gloria Vanderbilt black denims. It's a shame to call them jeans.
This is the place.
Ace is the place for best buys of the month, like the original Vice Grip 7-inch locking pliers. Can be used as clamp, wrench, wire cutter, and more. Best buy priced at just $4.44.
Another Best Buy is this Proctor Silex toaster. Chrome finish with almond accents. Easy to clean. Fingertip control gives the right shade of toast. Only $9.99.
Best buys of the month and one thing more. Ace is the place with the help of hardware man.
Now, at every suitery, thousands of final markdowns. Final markdowns on suits and sport coats and slacks, sport shirts and more. Why? Because the suitery is getting bigger, with new locations on the way on North Clark Street and Springbrook in Bloomingdale. Plus, a better quality selection than ever. We're clearing the way with thousands of final markdowns at your nearby suitery, where your taste level is more affordable than ever. For suitery locations, dial SUITERY, Suitery.
Folks, I'm Mal Belaires, and I want to tell you about an entirely new way to buy brand name carpeting direct from a mill outlet warehouse, right in the comfort of your own home, for as little as $5.95 a square yard. That includes padding and professional installation. You can also buy Armstrong no-wax floor covering for as little as $3.95 a square yard. And yes, Carpetman offers excellent credit terms, too. So pick up the phone and dial Carpets, C-A-R-P-E-T-S. You may never pay retail again.
Before I talk with Les Gelb about the results of both our scientific poll and our telephone survey, let's see how that telephone survey is going. A quick look at the numbers. As you can see, just an overwhelming majority, almost 20-1, believing that the administration should take strong action against the Soviet Union. But Les Gelb, what I find fascinating is, A, first of all, that is reflected in the scientific poll, which, as I recall, was 83% in favor, 17% against, rather. But then there was this rather curious finding. Do you think the administration will take strong action? Complete reversal. 60% thought no, 40% thought yes. Why?
People have a pretty good sense of how Reagan is playing the situation politically. They see that even though he's talking tough, that when you come down to specific actions, or maybe it just won't work. They can size it up. That poll you took is a good mixture of common sense and nonsense. We want strong action, but we don't know what it should be.
What we're seeing in the numbers, and those numbers are still mounting up, so I don't want to give any final numbers yet, is a huge, I mean, we've done these surveys several times before, but a great many people are dialing in tonight, more than usual. I almost get the sense that it's one of the few things that people feel they can do, is register a voice, even if it's just a phone call.
Well, it is. You have an event like this, it strikes people in a very special way. But Ted, the situation is very tricky. And Reagan is in a very complex situation politically, because if he takes very strong action now to meet this popular demand, he'll find it even more difficult to make the kinds of compromises and continue the kind of dialogue later that the public may want at that time. So he's got to play off the immediate public desire for strong action against the likelihood that come election time, they'll want peace, arms control.
All right, Les Gelb, thanks very much. Just one final note on the telephone survey. We are going to be leaving our phones open, our switchboards open, so that you can still register votes and so that all votes in all time zones can be taken into account. And we will have the final results on Nightline on Monday. I'll be back in a moment.
Are you looking for a good used car?
We believe car for car, dollar for dollar, you won't find a better used car value.
Then it's Solozzi Edelson Chevrolet in Elmhurst.
The Sabre Room presents wonderful musical shows, fine dining and dancing. Banquet facilities, too. Call 598-1200.
Dominic's Produce Department has the fresh fruits of summer that you enjoy. Delicious seedless green grapes are just 39 cents a pound through Wednesday at Dominic's.
On Sunday, This Week with David Brinkley will address two main topics: Soviet-American relations in the aftermath of the Korean Airlines incident and the impending change of leadership in the Israeli government. That's our report for tonight. This is Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us at ABC News, good night and have a nice Labor Day weekend.
This has been ABC News Nightline. For those of you who wish to obtain a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Nightline, Box 234, Ansonia Station, New York, New York, 10023. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. Gennady Gerasimov is a Soviet political analyst and political commentator for the Soviet news agency Novosti. He is with us tonight, live from Moscow. Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick is the United States representative at the United Nations. She is with us tonight, live from New York. Our topic, today's acknowledgement by the Soviet Union that it did indeed, in the Soviets' words, terminate Korean Airlines Flight 007.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
The Soviets have finally admitted in very circumspect language that their military did indeed shoot down that Korean airliner. But why remains something of a mystery. The Soviets charged that the plane was involved in some kind of U.S. espionage attempt. That may sound compelling in Moscow, but here in Washington, even among officials of previous administrations with no love for Ronald Reagan, the charge is dismissed as unconvincing. There is believed to be little or nothing that could be learned through the use of that Korean 747 that couldn't be more efficiently learned through satellites, listening posts, or military reconnaissance aircraft, which would seem to suggest that the Soviets are guilty of incredible brutality, unbelievable incompetence, or possibly both. Joining us live now to discuss those possibilities or some others I may have overlooked are from New York, Washington's ambassador to the United Nations, Jean Kirkpatrick, and from Moscow, Gennady Gerasimov, analyst and commentator for the Soviet news agency Novosti. Mr. Gerasimov, I would assume that you have some other explanation. Why was the plane shot down?
Well, the plane was shot down because it was in the Soviet airspace, and the pilot didn't know that it was a civilian airliner.
Does it surprise you to learn that there have been some Soviet aircraft in American airspace and they have not been shot down for the simple reason that most civilized nations do not do that, especially when dealing with civilian aircraft?
Well, I don't know about the cases that the Soviet airlines were unidentified and were stopped in American airspace. I don't know about these accidents. The problem with this particular accident is that the Soviet pilot didn't recognize that it was a civilian plane. And it was over, as they say in the statement of the Soviet government, which was announced yesterday, the plane was over, and now I quote from Pravda newspaper, the most important base of strategic forces of the Soviet Union.
Mr.
Maybe
Gerasimov,
this is the explanation.
I'm no pilot and obviously no expert on the silhouettes of aircraft, but I suspect, that even you would know the difference between a 747 and a reconnaissance aircraft. They don't look anything like each other, at least not by visual
I don't know
sight.
how the reconnaissance RC-135, yes?
135. It looks very much like a Boeing 707.
I don't know how it looks like. I do know how Boeing 747 looks like. I was flying on it, but as they say, our military people say that the radar signature, as they call it, is the same.
Yes,
so on radar screen, it was the same.
On the radar screens, I think you're probably correct, because I've heard the same thing from American specialists, but your pilots, the pilots of the Su-15s, the pilots of the MiG-23s, they had this plane in visual sighting. They were only, I believe, I heard the pilots say in the tapes that we've heard, only 2 kilometers away on a fairly bright, moonlit night. One would assume that a professional military pilot could tell the difference.
Well, the plane was behaving very strangely. And yesterday on Soviet TV, I asked your president 6 questions. And one of them was why the behavior of the plane was so strange. It didn't answer. Radio, it didn't follow the maneuvers of Soviet planes. So it was behaving as if it was something of a very strange spy plane, and it was over a very sensitive area. All this is very unfortunate, by the way, the whole thing that happened. But to begin with, question number one was why it could deviate into Soviet airspace. It's the most modern plane in civil aviation, and many pilots who use this plane, they say that it is technically next to impossible to lose your way, so to say, in air on this particular plane. So the Soviet side maybe was thinking that it was an intentional flight over Soviet territory.
Even if it were, Mr. Gerasimov, and in a moment, I assume, first of all, that when you say you asked the questions of President Reagan, these are more or less rhetorical questions which you would like to have answered by the U.S. government. In a moment, I'll pose a couple of those questions, if you like, to Ambassador Kirkpatrick. But let me just ask you one final question, and we will be coming back to you later in the broadcast, but for the moment, one final question. Let us assume, and I don't think there's any argument, that the 747 was indeed over Soviet territory, way beyond your borders. Nevertheless, it was a civilian aircraft with 269 civilian passengers. One would assume that your military would take some care in distinguishing between that kind of an aircraft and military reconnaissance plane. Simply because it's over Soviet airspace doesn't, one would think, give the Soviet Union the right to shoot the plane down.
Well, the Soviet government issued several statements, a series of them, and from the very beginning till the last statement, it is that they didn't identify in the plane at the moment of this unfortunate accident, they didn't identify it as a civilian plane. The Soviet government expressed its regret and deep sorrow for the loss of life.
Actually, the Soviet government has issued a number of statements over the last few days, some of which seem to contradict the earlier statements. Today, only 5 days after the plane was shot down, for the first time, your government decided that indeed it did shoot down the plane. Why did it take so long to find that out?
Well, if you read our statements before that, it was tacitly there that, for instance...
Well, it said the plane disappeared.
As though it were an act of God. Expressed its regret for the loss of life. But you see, maybe it was a kind of, first of all, maybe they were gathering information, and second, maybe it was a kind of waiting for the American side to say something. And for instance, your side was silent about your spy plane being in the area for several days. So you see, maybe we're waiting for something else to develop.
Why, Mr. Gerasimov, since the American reconnaissance plane was flying in international airspace, why was it necessary to wait for the American government to acknowledge that?
Well, that I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe, you see, we knew from the very beginning there were two planes in the area. And the observation was established to both planes, so to say. Excuse my English, but we didn't say it in the beginning. So we kept this particular piece of information till the American side admitted. So maybe this explains why we were a little bit late with the latest statement.
You were talking about your government having tacitly admitted that it shot down the plane. The fact that it has expressed regrets, is that like a tacit apology?
It's not an apology. You see, it's for us, the whole unfortunate episode is looks completely different. My government sees in this a very big provocation, because as maybe I will have time to enumerate 6 points of mine, because of these 6 points, we think that it was an intentional flight over Soviet territory by a civilian plane, which was also a spying plane, and the purpose of it was, first, if it succeeds, to see if it's possible to use civilian planes for spy purposes, and second, if it fails, as it really did, then to raise hell and to use it for undermining the international situation, to use it to prove again that your government, your administration is right in its course of peace through strength, in its harsh attitude toward the Soviet Union, with these barbarians, as your president put it. So to use it for political purposes to undermine the international situation.
All right, Mr. Gerasimov, that's just one of many interesting points that we will indeed have a chance to discuss a little bit further. In a moment, we'll turn to the United Nations Security Council, where today Ambassador Kirkpatrick charged the Soviets with calculated actions that shocked the world, and where today the United States played tape recordings of the Soviet pilots during the final moments of Korean Airlines Flight 7. And we'll talk with Ambassador Kirkpatrick.
I'm closing on the target. I'm in lock-on. Distance to target is 8 kilometers.
Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick is with us in New York. It was she who today spearheaded the U.S. diplomatic assault on the Soviet attack on that Korean airliner. And in a moment, we'll be talking to Mrs. Kirkpatrick live. Who provoked whom in the destruction of the Korean airliner went before the Security Council of the United Nations today. U.S. Ambassador Kirkpatrick played a recording illustrated with videotape of the Soviet fighter pilot's communication with his ground control before he fired the missile that terminated Flight 007. It was, as Marilyn Berger reports, reminiscent of a similar episode nearly 21 years ago, when Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronted the Russians with U.S. evidence and demanded an explanation.
All right, sir. Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sights in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
I am not in an American courtroom, sir, and therefore I do not wish to answer a question that is put to me in the fashion in which a prosecutor does. In due course, sir, you will have your reply.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision.
Today, in one of the most dramatic meetings held in the Security Council since that exchange 21 years ago, U.S. Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick, unlike her predecessor Adlai Stevenson, chose not to wait until hell freezes over for an answer from the Soviet Union, this time about the ill-fated Korean airliner. She provided a videotape with the answers.
On this tape, you will hear the voices of pilots of Soviet interceptors, which included 3 Su-15 flagons and 1 MiG-23 flogger, including the Su-15 pilot who pulled the trigger, which released the missiles that destroyed the Korean Airlines Flight 007.
The target strobe light is blinking. I see it visually and on radar. The target isn't responding to IFF. The ANO are burning. The strobe light is flashing. I've already approached the target to a distance of about 2 kilometers. The target is decreasing speed. I'm dropping back. Now I'll try a rocket. I'm closing on the target. I'm in lock-on. I've executed the launch. The target is destroyed. I'm breaking off attack.
Those voices demonstrated that the Korean plane's lights were flashing when the Russians said its lights were off, that it was staying on course and decreasing speed when the Russians insist it was trying to avoid pursuit, and contradicted a Soviet allegation that the Russian pilots could not see the plane because of poor visibility. This morning, Soviet Ambassador Oleg Troyanovsky was still repeating the party line, but it was yesterday's party line, already being contradicted in Moscow practically at the moment he spoke. At first, he refused to acknowledge that Russian fighters had shot down the Korean airliner. Then, in the afternoon, when he got word that Moscow had admitted downing the plane, Troyanovsky had an excuse prepared.
The Soviet pilots, in stopping the actions of the intruder plane, could not know that it was a civilian aircraft. It was flying without navigation lights in the height of night, in conditions of bad visibility, and was not answering the signals
Korean Ambassador Kim accused the Soviet Union of inventing lies, saying that no one could confuse the Korean 747 for an American reconnaissance jet.
Unless Soviet fighter pilots are exclusively recruited only from those with seriously defective eyesight, it is possible to imagine that they could have mistaken one plane for the other.
In a council that has resounded for years with anti-American rhetoric, the words had suddenly changed. Marilyn Berger for Nightline at the United Nations.
Joining us live now from New York, Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick. Mrs. Kirkpatrick, do you have any idea yet, 5 days after the fact, why that Korean airliner was so far off course?
No, we don't. The fact is, there are really only two possibilities. We know that it had 3 computerized navigational devices, and either there was a human error in programming those computers, or else there was a mechanical failure. But we really don't know, and I don't suppose we ever will know. One of the many problems about the Soviet behavior is that they're not permitting either us or the Japanese or the Koreans or anybody to assist in the search mission to try to retrieve any of the kinds of evidence that might give us some answers to that. You know, even today, the Soviets have never shared the black box, which would have helped to explain the 1978 Korean airline disaster.
What you're referring to is back in '78 when they shot down another Korean airliner. That one crashed on the ice and only 2 people were killed.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, because if there is any aspect to this story about which the American audience might be queasy with regard to its own government's activity, it is the delay in admitting that there was an RC-135 American reconnaissance plane in the area. Why did it take so long for the administration to admit that?
Actually, there wasn't an American aerial reconnaissance plane in the area.
Not when it was shot down, but it was in the area before that.
Well, depends on what you mean by in the area. Because as I made clear today, and the President made clear, when the Korean airliner was shot down, over Soviet airspace. The U.S. aerial reconnaissance was never near Soviet, was never in Soviet airspace or even broached the edges of it, really. When the Korean airliner was shot down, the American aerial reconnaissance plane had already landed an hour earlier, 1,500 miles away. So I don't know, I just don't think you call that in the area, in fact.
No, not anymore, but we know, because you and others in the administration have told us that reconnaissance plane was, in point of fact, in the same vicinity as the Korean 747 during the 2.5 hours, at some point during that 2.5-hour period, during which the Soviets were in fact tracking the plane.
Well, at the beginning, actually, of the 2.5-hour period, before they were over Soviet airspace at all. And the Soviets knew that there were 2 planes. We just heard that from the other guest on your show. Soviets knew perfectly well that there were 2 planes there. So there never really was any confusion about whether there was whether there were 2 planes, or we never were in the area that they were pursuing or shooting down anybody. That's it sort of literally wasn't relevant.
I am told by specialists in the field that sometimes large commercial aircraft like that 747 are in effect used for shielding a reconnaissance plane from enemy radar tracking, for masking in effect. Is that true?
Well, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field. If you say sometimes, I'm sure that's not the case here, because the Korean airliner was on a course which is an the route that it was flying and should have stayed on is a route that is absolutely routine and flown by dozens of flights, literally.
But of course it wasn't on that route.
No, but it was in the beginning, and it was at a point that it, for example, was intersected with the American aerial reconnaissance. The American aerial reconnaissance plane was again on a routine route which it tries to verify salt treaty verification. And as I understand it, in any case, the Soviets know what our aerial reconnaissance flight courses are, just as we know what theirs are, and so there just wouldn't have been any question at all of confusion about that. The Soviets understood that there were two planes there very briefly in international airspace. They know what our routes are. They knew what the other routes were.
All right, we've got to take a break, Madam Ambassador. When we return, we'll resume our live discussion with Soviet political analyst Gennady Gerasimov in Moscow and with UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick in New York. Joining us once again live from Moscow, Gennady Gerasimov, political commentator for the Soviet news agency Novosti. Mr. Gerasimov, let me try again. Your government has conceded that it shot the plane down. It has expressed regrets that it happened. Is anyone prepared to acknowledge yet that a mistake was made?
You see, the pilot was acting according to his instructions. So I'm not sure that anybody is prepared. And the responsibility, as we see, lies with somebody who sent this spy plane into our airspace.
Now you're going to have to explain that, if you would, in somewhat greater detail, because I don't know that any evidence has been presented yet. Perhaps you'll present the first of it tonight, that this was indeed a spy plane.
Well, I don't have direct evidence. I have questions which were not answered, and two of them were already touched upon by Mrs. Ambassador. And one is there is no answer to the question why this plane, which is, as I've said, technically superior and have navigation systems, several of them, why this plane was has had this deviation from the usual course. The question is not answered. The second question about the second plane, I don't think the answer is satisfactory, because it's, well, you may say it's a routine flight, but at some point it was in the same area, and of course it could complicate the picture for Soviet military authorities in the region.
Well, let me just stop you for one moment, Mr. Gerasimov, because as Ambassador Kirkpatrick indicated a moment ago, we have a number of treaties between our two countries, and in order to verify that each side is adhering to the terms of those treaties, each country is entitled to pursue what are called, I believe, national means of verification. That refers to satellites, it refers to reconnaissance aircraft. So you know very well that these kinds of reconnaissance aircraft are in your area, and you also know that commercial aircraft fly in the area. It seems to be an enormous leap of logic to be able to go from one to the shooting down of another.
Well, I don't dispute that there are national means of verification, but it's one thing to use satellites, which are permitted, or maybe to use planes far off from the Soviet airspace. And it's quite another thing to use this particular reason to send the spy planes into the Soviet territory, which happens sometimes, you know, U-2 incident and others.
Yeah, but of course,
this
that was, 23 years ago, 24 years ago?
Still I remember.
It still rankles with the Soviet Union. I guess then it's fair to point out that this is the second time the Soviet Union has shot down a commercial airliner in only 5 years. Is that an accident?
Well, but it's not an accident, because it was just there were many circumstances put together, and the presence of an additional spy plane in the region was one of them, and it was close to this commercial airliner, and I don't think that it is a rule in civil aviation to escort civil airlines with military ones.
Ambassador Kirkpatrick?
And this was the case.
It's just appalling. It's like saying that a plane that lands in Chicago an hour in advance of one that lands in San Francisco could be, as it were, legitimately confused with it for having been in the air at one point an hour and a half before over Omaha or something.
I am not saying that.
You know, and furthermore,
there was a
I think the Soviets
keep Mr. Gerasimov, if you'd be good enough to let the ambassador finish first, then I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
You know, I think
that
the Soviets. Thank you. I think that the Soviet Union is trying to call the Korean airliner a spy plane And we know it was over Soviet territory. We know it is straight over Soviet territory. And by calling it a spy plane again and again and again to leave an impression that they, that there's some reason to believe it was a spy plane. There's absolutely no reason to believe that at all, any more than any other commercial airliner.
You see, you must imagine the situation. And the duration, it was for 2 hours and a half. And during these 2 hours and a half, there were plenty of coincidences or complications. And one of them was that your reconnaissance plane met somewhere in the area or just immediately before the Korean airliner entered the Soviet airspace, met with your spy plane, who was detected by Soviet radar.
See, Mr. Gerasimov, that's...
I'm not saying that there was a case of mistaken identity. I'm saying that it's just one of the complications which are coming into the whole picture.
No, I guess one of the complications that troubles me in that, Mr. Gerasimov, is if, for example, the Soviet Su-15 had shot down the 747 at the same time that it was in the region with the reconnaissance plane, one might, I suppose, by torturing logic just a little bit, be able to excuse the act. But it didn't happen until about an hour and a half later, when the plane had long since landed at another airbase in Alaska. Now, how do you use the one to justify the other?
It didn't invalidate my argument, which is that it was one of the complications which came into the picture.
Tell us about some of the other complications. Maybe they'll be a little more compelling.
Yes. The other complication, I mentioned the first one, the plane strayed off course. Now, the other complication is that the plane didn't answer on the radio or from the ground and from the Soviet pilots. He didn't answer. He didn't follow the maneuvers. So its behavior could look very strange for Soviet pilots. So the third complication is that, as I mentioned, the plane was over extremely sensitive area.
All right, Mr. Gerasimov, if you'll forgive me, we have to take a break for just a moment. I'll be back with you and with Mrs. Kirkpatrick in just a moment.
Okay.
United States Ambassador to the UN, Jean Kirkpatrick, and in Moscow, Soviet political analyst Gennady Gerasimov. Madam Ambassador, Mr. Gerasimov raised an interesting point a moment ago. Why do you think it was that the Korean plane did not answer Soviet inquiries? Or were there any Soviet inquiries?
We don't know that there were any Soviet inquiries at all. We don't have any... nothing on the tape suggests that there were Soviet inquiries to the plane during the 20 minutes, roughly 50 minutes, that it was, before it was destroyed. We think that the Soviet planes don't have the standard international emergency frequency, which would have enabled them to contact the Korean airliner, in fact.
Why is that? I mean,
well, we think the reason is that they fear that Soviet pilots might defect, might use that international emergency frequency to establish contact with other people and defect. In any case, we don't think they have it.
Point of order here.
Just a minute, please. We have no evidence, and the tape shows no serious effort at all to identify the Korean airliner, or it shows the ground raising no questions about what kind of a plane it is, and the Soviet interceptor fighters raising no questions really about who it is. It simply shows them tracking and deciding to destroy and destroying. And that maybe is the most shocking thing of all about the tape, is the lack of concern about who it was they were trying to blast out of the sky.
Go ahead, Mr. Gerasimov.
First of all, I would like to mention that though your president said in his speech that Soviet fighter planes are not equipped with this particular radio, which works on this special wavelength 1 to 1.5 megahertz. Actually, they are equipped, and it was mentioned in the statement made by the Soviet government. So it's just the statement of fact. So they had this particular facility and they used it, I suppose.
Well, actually, they didn't, if I may say so. Because we do have perfectly reliable electronic tape recordings of the conversations from the Soviet pilots, and they did not make such inquiries.
I'll tell you what, let me put the question in another way, Mr. Gerasimov.
Yes.
I would assume that the Soviet government has access to tape recorders also, and presumably they would have tapes of those conversations. It would be very dramatic if the Soviet government produced those tapes. Do you think they have them?
That I don't really know. I simply don't know. But you see, we had this accident in action, so to say, for 2 hours and a half. And with modern communications, it was pretty easy for somebody somewhere in Washington or Tokyo to take up the telephone receiver and to call Moscow and to explain the whole thing. And why not, why the hotline was not used in this particular case to stop this tragedy?
You think this is an appropriate use for the hotline? I mean, first of all, I'm not sure that the tapes had made their way all the way back to the decision-making people in Washington before the plane was shot down. But I suppose more to the point, Mr. Gerasimov, is that no one in Washington would have thought that your government was going to shoot the plane down. Do you think that might be a reason for not calling you?
You see, if the information was there that the plane was over the Soviet territory, I guess it's a valid reason to use any communication link available.
Let me ask the question. Very bluntly, Mr. Gerasimov.
Yes.
Now that you know that it was indeed a civilian aircraft, now that you know that 269 civilians died, do you think it was appropriate to shoot it down?
Of course not. I would say in this way, that if the Soviet pilot knew for sure that it was not a spy plane, it was a civilian plane, he had to try again to land it. And but then I say the plane was behaving very strangely, maneuvering, and didn't want to follow the orders. And that's why he assumed that it was a spy plane. Also, I would like to add that there is information now which was not there, but which is now available after this accident, that the commercial airlines are routinely used for gathering information. And in the beginning of the program, it was mentioned by you that we have satellites, so why worry about planes?
Well, we have satellites and reconnaissance aircraft,
yes,
so why worry about a commercial aircraft?
I am not a specialist in the field, but I've read in your newspapers and in our newspapers that even though you have very good satellites, planes are even better for some details of reconnaissance business. And they are used, commercial airlines of friendly countries to the United States, they are supplied with certain equipment, spy equipment, at your military base somewhere. I guess it's Vandenberg, or I don't know.
Mrs. Kirkpatrick, it seems like a direct charge. You want to respond directly?
No, of course. I mean, absolutely not. The United States would not even
I've read about it in your paper. San Francisco Examiner.
Using commercial airliners which carry passengers, but any kind of intelligence gathering or reconnaissance information, that's just an outrageous, absolute